Okay, without further ado, using coaching to close more deals. Before we crack on with this, guys, I just want to talk a little bit about our sponsors. We've kindly taken the time out to sponsor this conversation, or this webinar, I should say. And look, Raf and I have sort of agonized over this because the subject matter is so close to our hearts and we're genuinely so passionate about coaching that we wanted to be conscious about the organizations that we picked. So we've picked three organizations. One is Raf's organization. He's kindly agreed to sponsor it as well. But the other two are Wiser and E4 Enable. And I just want to take a moment just to talk about what these sponsors do and why we picked them, to be perfectly honest with you. So Wiser Elite specializes in placing SDRs through to VP talent across the UK's most ambitious SaaS organizations. Their clients include Qualtrics, Darktrace, Circle CI, and ReachDesk. Aside from recruitment, they bring sales professionals together through communities to help them create a wider network and share best practice. Their four communities are the Elite, SDRs of London, AEs of London, and the Black Tech Sales Network. Now, I fully recommend getting involved in those communities, incredibly useful resources, as well as Wiser Elite being a fantastic recruiter as well. I often do talks for those communities, and I can say that they're a very engaged, hardworking and conscientious group, and there's a lot of good sharing and knowledge in there as well. We also have E4 Enable, a fabulous SaaS platform. E4 Enable's data-driven coaching platform puts sales competencies at the heart of every sales coaching conversation, driving improvement in skills and performance and measuring the outcomes by integrating with your CRM, conversational analytics tools, social media, and all other elements of your sales tech stack. E4 Enable's platform seamlessly collates all the necessary information in one place, removing coaching blind spots and enabling effective coaching conversations that are directly impacting revenue. Kate, if you're on, feel free to put your website in the chat if people want to look at those, and likewise with Wiser as well. So jumping straight into it, using coaching to close more deals. Now, just to be really clear about this isn't your traditional webinar where we've got 1,000 slides where we sit here and comfortably talk through content. Raf and I have been working together in various different guises in different continents, countries, and organizations, and spent way too much time lingering around salespeople and having coaching conversations. And this usually culminates in both of us sitting in a shitty pub somewhere in London and talking about coaching and how passionate we are about it. So the way we want to treat this webinar is almost used to be like a guest in that pub, minus the sort of flat, warm beer and the stale crisps. But that's very much how we want this to take part. Now, we will have a platform at the end for any questions, so feel free to fire those questions through as we progress through this webinar. So I best start by talking about myself. My name is Aaron Evans. I've got 13 plus years of coaching experience. I've worked for large multinational corporates right through to very, very small, nimble startups and scale-ups. And I'm incredibly passionate about coaching. I'm a qualified coach, and I'm also a practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming and neurosemantics. I now work for an organization called Global Data, and I have about 500 salespeople that sales managers that I'm responsible for coaching, training, developing, and ultimately getting better at their job and driving revenue. Raf, you've been very patient and very quiet. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Aaron. And hello to everyone. Great to see many people calling from far-flung corners of the world today, which is fantastic. I'm Raf. I'm the founder of Flow State. We help sales teams and organizations build foundations to achieve high performance through training, coaching, enablement frameworks, and implementing best practices and process, which help to codify and scale successful behaviors. We work with many different types of businesses, which is a great amount of fun and very, very satisfying. Prior to Flow State, I worked in B2B sales for about 17 years in many different markets, both for large corporates and also for fast growth scale-ups in a variety of sales and sales leadership and management roles. But sales coaching has been the common thread, running through all of that, and something I'm really, really passionate about.
Awesome. Well, let's jump straight into it then. Now, I guess before we start talking about some of the techniques and the tips and the practical application that you can take away from me on this webinar around coaching, and also the definition of coaching, right? Because coaching is quite a nebula term. I want to talk through a couple of statistics that hopefully should make your jaws hit the deck. Now, I want to start by saying this, is that coaching seems to be having its time in the sun. What I mean by that is if you go back 2 or 3 years ago, every single business was talking about AI. You've got to have AI. Go back 5 years ago and you couldn't leave a meeting without someone talking about big data. And at the moment, and I'm really grateful of this, is that a lot of organizations are talking about coaching, and they're talking about the power of coaching. Not every organization gets it right by any stretch of the imagination, but I just want to start by talking about some of the powerful outcomes we can expect to see through running a real good coaching cadence and capability in an organization. So to start with, and imagine, look, if you're a sales manager or even a rep sitting there now, close rates increased by 17% when it comes to coaching. And this was a study done by salesprogress.com. Now, just think about that in terms of revenue. Think about that in terms of how much money, how much time saved by those closing ratios going up by 17%. Unbelievable. Expired deals decreased by 63%. You know, those deals that just have no action or they just turn into a no decision, we see a decrease of 63%. Now, the thing that jumps out to me about this statistic is the time that we get back. We can use that time instead of selling to opportunities that are never, ever, ever going to transact with us. We can use that time on prospects and customers who have the inclination and motivation to actually transact with our business. Close date changes decreased by 25%. Now, I've sat in pipeline reviews, both as a rep, as a manager, and as a coach, sweating profusely because there's 5 or 6 deals that are sitting in the pipeline where the close date is not accurate. And the thing that's driving the rep's decision to put it in there is often hope. And that's a very, very bad place to be in. With good quality coaching, we can make sure that we can decrease those close date changes by 25%. This is about driving compelling events, driving a reason to buy, and actually getting the customer to commit to purchasing to a timeline that's relevant for you and your organization, and more importantly, the customer. Days since last customer interaction decreased by 73%. That's a staggering number. What do we mean by this? Well, we find in organizations that don't have a good coaching cadence, the impetus and the ball is in the customer's court. So it's down to us to just patiently wait for the customer to get back to us while we're waiting for a decision to happen. Well, we see actually those interactions increase by using quality coaching. And the outcome of this is that we have an improved customer engagement. We're talking to the customer more regularly during that sales process and that interaction as a buyer. And ultimately, if we get the opportunity and the customer isn't right, we just qualify them out, which is a really, really powerful skill to have. Now, this last stat that I'm about to get up is, for me, the most mind-blowing. And I want you to think of this from the perspective of being in a casino where you're at a craps table and they say, look, for every dollar that you put down, you get $7.90 in return. Now, if you're a manager, a CEO, or even a rep, and you're not using coaching at the moment, this for me is the most compelling statistic. For every $1 spent on coaching, there is an 8x almost return on investment. It's absolutely critical that businesses are using coaching and driving conversations through a coaching capability. So let's talk about some definitions. When we hear the word coaching, it obviously has many different meanings in many different walks of life, but from a sales perspective, what do we mean by the term coaching exactly?
Yeah, there are many definitions and many applications, but broadly speaking, sales coaching is a development approach that allows an individual or a group to reflect and gain awareness of their strengths, their challenges, their areas of improvement, the options open to them, and what actions they can take in order to make the changes that they actually want. Unlike in training, where it's really about the trainer imparting their knowledge, the role of the coach is crucial because it's not about telling the answers. It's actually about facilitating self-discovery within the coachee and actually guiding them to arrive at a satisfactory conclusion to that. I think the slide you've got up here actually is a really great one. It's a really good visual representation of the different techniques or tactics available when you're trying to impart knowledge and develop new skills and behaviors, right? This is a model called the Miles Downey spectrum. On the bottom left-hand side, you've got this classic directive approach, which is very much around telling, instructing, giving answers. And at the top right, this non-directive approach, which is essentially around helping someone arrive at their own conclusion, or to use another phrase, turn on their own light bulb. The reason I think this is really, really powerful as a visual is because there's a whole body of science which talks around behavioral change. And the fundamental premise that people are much more likely to act on their own conclusions and not the conclusions handed on to them by others. So it's a great way of looking at it. And, along this spectrum, you can see all the different approaches that we can take when we're actually trying to engage and consider new options and drive new skills and behaviors. I think within a sales environment, it's a perfect environment in some ways for coaching to be applied in different applications, because there are so many different interactions that you're having with a prospect or customer or a colleague, so many different techniques and tactics and processes that you're trying to employ. It can get quite complex. And so having the ability and having a framework to self-assess and optimize these things is really, really important.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I look at this here, and the way I see it is I'm a trainer and a coach, right? So there's always a part of me that wants to tell, right? Because that's part of my job is training, right? But I see it as being kind of the easy option and the hard option. Obviously, there's pressures that affect sales managers and why they often go for that kind of bottom left corner of telling, be it, the target or time poor, whatever it may be. But it's a lot harder to sort of pause, take the time with a rep or even a customer, because we can coach customers as well, and try and guide them to the conclusion themselves. And I love that analogy of turning on their own light bulb. The expedient kind of example I always use, and this may seem throwaway, but it's really, really not, is this idea of if you were to come and ask me where my scissors are, as an example, right, in my house, where do you keep your scissors? Now, the easy thing for me to do there is to go, well, they're in the third drawer down of the kitchen, right? But by pausing with you and saying, well, look, Raf, where do you keep your scissors?
In the kitchen.
Okay, whereabouts in the kitchen do you keep them?
In one of the drawers. I think they're hidden there amongst lots of old takeaway menus and boxes with nails and various other bits.
And which drawer would you keep them in? Which one down?
I think it's the second drawer.
Okay, interesting, right? So now what we've got is we've got a realization and we've got a strategy. So I now say to you, Raf, go and look in the second drawer down and see what's there, and you discover the scissors. Now that might seem really, really throwaway, right? But what we've actually done is we've created a new way of you thinking about things. So fundamentally, it doesn't matter what the problem is that we insert in there, your thinking will be the same. So you might come over to my house tomorrow with a nice bottle of red wine and go, where's your bottle opener? Now, what's the first question you're going to ask yourself after multiple interactions like that?
Which room will I put it in, and probably which drawer?
Exactly right. So this idea of creating new neural pathways and creating a way of thinking is really interesting, because it may feel like a big time investment initially, but in the long run, you're saving a ton of time along the way, and you're creating a way of thinking that's sustainable for every type of problem that's out there, which for me is really, really interesting. So let's look at that, right? So how many times do you need to do that to actually start changing behavior in someone?
It can happen, and I've seen it happen from one conversation, and that's both when I've had the benefit of being coached, and also when I've enabled coaching, a coaching conversation. I think I just want to touch on a point before I answer this, right, which is, having spent many years as a sales manager, it is difficult, right? Because I think as salespeople and as sales managers, we're often trained and to problem solve and find solutions quickly. Identify a problem, great, let's talk about the solution. And I think sometimes what happens subconsciously even is that you tend to drift into that solution mode. Actually, here's the answer, let's go away and solve it and move on to the next thing. Now, sales managers are time poor. We're looking after our teams. We're trying to drive the operational strategy of an organization. We're carrying team numbers. Sometimes it's the path of least resistance, or the quickest, most efficient thing to do that we tell ourselves is actually to go and tell the answer. But to have a quality coaching conversation, you need to create your own sort of mental headspace in order to do that effectively, right? So, I think this challenge for managers is a really important one. But to have it front of mind that the power of coaching is an important way to start kind of creating that space and the environment to do so. But it can happen relatively quickly off the back of a single conversation that's had in that way. You can enable someone to come up with a conclusion that they haven't had before, or to think about a problem in a different way, or to come up with a new solution, which then they can apply later on. A typical example of that, could be in a deal review setting, or if you're doing, some live call coaching, or listening to a call recording, where you're asking someone to assess why they took a particular approach within a call, and what happened from that, and what their learning was. And I've seen even later on in that in the day, they may have a conversation with another prospect or customer where they've actually gone, you know what, I'm going to use the learnings from that call today and apply this approach now. So it can happen very, very quickly. I think there is an opportunity and also a challenge with coaching in trying to solve too many things at once, right? So I think having a framework that you can start to look at particular areas of an opportunity or a particular skill or certain behavior and start to bring those into focus little and often is a really good way of doing things.
And I guess that brings us nicely onto this slide, right? This idea of practice makes perfect, and repetition ultimately is what makes things stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're talking here about actually what does coaching enable? Well, first and foremost, it improves the retention of key learnings. I think this model here was designed by a guy called Herming Ebbinghaus, and it talks about the memory retention of a new learning if it isn't practiced several times after that initial moment in time. As we know, and there's again many studies around this, learnings from training start to dip down after I think a week or 2 weeks or so quite significantly if you haven't practiced that. So in order to enable all of those commercial outcomes and performance outcomes that you spoke about earlier on, the first thing that coaching does is actually it helps to retain some of those key learnings through practice. Just like when you're practicing a tennis serve or playing a piece of music or cooking your favorite dish, it takes a bit of time to ingrain that into your own sort of muscle memory, as it were. I think through embedding those new skills and behaviors, you start to drive these right performance outcomes through the right inputs. But I think it's also worth touching on, there's another whole aspect, I think, which is really, really valuable of coaching, which is not just about the performance or the results. These are other, intangible benefits, but in my opinion, no less valuable, right? So again, coaching has been linked to improved morale, improved staff retention, stronger relationships within a team, strong relationships perhaps with your direct line manager who's providing the coaching to you as well. That's really important because I think for coaching to be effective, both parties, the coach and the coachee, they need to deeply care, about that coaching and have a shared accountability of that coaching for it to become effective. You can't kind of go into coaching and do it from a half-assed perspective. You've got to deeply care. And I think to create an effective coaching environment, that clearly there needs to be some rapport and some level of trust there that it's a safe environment. And to some extent, to do that, there is an element of intimacy that you need to create with your peer in order to do that and provide effective feedback and actually also have some vulnerability, which we know is a big enabler of trust and connection. And I don't think it's just vulnerability for the person who is being coached. There's an element there of vulnerability for the person providing the coaching too, because again, I can talk from my own experience. When I got into management, I had this false expectation issue that I kind of needed to know all of the answers, right? But coaching isn't always, well, it's certainly not about telling the answer, but you may find there are times when actually neither of you have that exact answer.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it was a big lesson for me to learn to be able to turn around and say, I don't know either, right? And I guess this sort of leads to the main purpose of coaching, right? Is that you're leading someone to the answer or to get to the resource of the answer. You don't necessarily have to know the answer. But more crucially, the answer that you arrive at isn't always the right answer. But the fact is that because this is going through the lens of coaching, it's about the learning you can get from doing things wrong as well, right? Like deal review is a great example where I've sat there and managers have gone, right, you need to pick up the phone, you need to get the metrics, you need to do this, you need to do that, without knowing any context of the deal at all. That might not be the right thing to do. But by sitting down with the rep or the salesperson, going through this journey together of learning about it, at least you have a strategy. Yeah. And a bad strategy is better than no strategy whatsoever. And this is the point. As long as you're learning from those strategies that you're undertaking. And this leads really neatly, actually, we're going to talk about this a bit later, about actually what are the outcomes that we want to see, or what's the next step with coaching, because so much time and money is wasted where organizations start coaching but there isn't actually a next step after that coaching. And we're going to talk about that a bit later on. Now, in context of this, right, I mean, there's different types of coaching, as you mentioned, that we can do. We can do at-desk coaching. We can do, just basically exec coaching. We're sitting down for an hour and we're just talking about all sorts of things. But in the mindset of driving revenue, one of the best places to looking at coaching is actually in deal reviews, because this is where we can take control of opportunities. We can drive the revenue forward and we can get the right outcomes that we want to see with that customer who's in pipe at the moment. And we're going to talk about something called a why buy analysis. And this is really, really powerful for actually doing in those pipe reviews and moving pipeline forward, or sometimes, as crucially, qualifying out opportunities. So you use this, Raf, right? You use why buy analysis both as a manager and as an owner of the business, right?
Yeah, I've used why buy analysis in different businesses. Some of those where a practice was already in place, and other organizations where there wasn't really a regular practice and we introduced it. And what I like about why buy is actually it's quite accessible, right? There are 3 very high level questions that we need to answer. But obviously within those, and when you start to ask those questions, it prompts a level of thinking that allows us to really delve into a deal. And again, there are sort of 2 fundamental purposes and benefits. One is around understanding what we do know about that opportunity, also what gaps and red flags there are, but actually what are the learnings that we can take from that help us as individuals to become more effective and adopt new skills and behaviors and ways of thinking from a sales perspective.
Yeah, competency jumps out of this a lot, right? Because you start by talking about the opportunity itself, but then what you realize is that there's actually a competency deficit. They don't know how to do things, right? And then you actually end up start coaching around the competency as well as the outcome. Where this is really powerful, and why I guess sales managers love the why buy analysis so much, is that it's a coaching framework that's used on live opportunities. So you're getting kind of a double bounce, right? You're coaching a rep, which is great. So they're getting the learning and the new ways of thinking about opportunities that we're hoping is going to turn into a deal as well. So let's start with that first piece here, right? Is the why are you buying anything at all, right? And this is really, really crucial. And as Raf mentioned before, we're deliberately starting broad, right? It's like a funnel. We want the rep to articulate why the customer is buying anything, not our product, anything at all. And then we get deeper and deeper down until we realize what the pain is that we're actually solving. So to put this in context of my world, I work for an organization called Global Data, which is a data provider fundamentally. And I've sat in so many pipe reviews or deal reviews where you ask that question, why are they buying anything? And the rep starts talking about outcomes. They need to see data. Okay, that's an outcome. Why do they need to see data? And that's the key thing. As you start asking these questions and you find yourself asking the word why quite a lot, ultimately you start learning the reason behind the reason. What's the purpose for them purchasing this product? And out the back of this, you can get the pain that the customer has, the challenge that they have, the opportunity that it's worth for them, how that opportunity has been sized, how the pain has been sized through metrics. And so much information can come out of that one simple question that it becomes incredibly valuable for understanding where the gaps are, what we do know and what we don't know. And then ultimately that becomes the strategy of driving that opportunity forward. Why buy now? Raf, do you want to talk a little bit about why buy now?
Yeah, again, right? I think by asking that question, you start to elicit what's really happening within the organization. Is there a particular compelling event? What's behind that? Have they tried before to solve this? You're bringing, time-based elements into it. Is there a target start date? What are some of the external pressures on the business if that start date isn't met? So again, it's a really good way to start drilling down and understanding where there are gaps in deals, red flags, and of course, importantly, coaching opportunities. So there's really good questions that we can ask around how we gather that information, whether that's an assumption, whether the customer's verified that. If we were to go back into that scenario previously, how could we do that differently? So again, it's a really good way that you could start to get the rep in your team thinking about what really strong practices are within different elements of your discovery process, different stages, of the sales and buying process that you're aligning on with your customer, by having this simple framework.
And lastly, for me, this one's the most interesting because often if there's a lack of information, this is where you get feature function. So you ask the rep, why are they buying your product? And they're turning around and saying, well, because we have this and because we have that. It shows a lack of understanding of ultimately what the customer needs. Now, interestingly, what you'll find is that there's an effect on each of these questions if data is lacking or important information is lacking or a competency is lacking. So it may come down to, let's start with the first one, why they're buying anything, and we haven't got metrics to actually quantify that. And then we can learn in that coaching conversation that the rep finds it difficult or impossible or doesn't know how to ask those questions around metrics. So again, we're not just talking about the opportunity itself, we're also getting some interesting competency to come out of the back of that we can start coaching around. Now, Raf, look, this is really simple framework, right? And it doesn't actually take that much investment. Why do you think managers struggle in a deal review scenario to actually ask these questions and feel a temptation to take control and tell more than they actually ask?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a multitude of reasons, but I think typically it could range from a desire to want to get to the solution very quickly, right? Now, I think again, when we're talking about a deal review practice here, but what we're also talking about really importantly is using a range of scenarios within the common working day or week of a sales organization to use those as really brilliant coaching opportunities. Great coaches ask brilliant questions, right? That's the thing. Great coaches are very good at asking brilliant questions. And that's why actually really good salespeople can be fantastic coaches and managers, because they have this, this really well-trained ability to ask great questions, right? And they also have the ability to provoke great questions within their teams as well. So why I think this is important is because I think arriving at an answer or a solution too soon, it shuts down alternatives, right? It shuts down thinking about problems in new ways. It shuts, it creates actually sometimes quite a sort of confirmation bias or groupthink. So constructive questioning helps us consider all of the assumptions that we make and reminds us to be open, to being different. So I think firstly, it could be a tendency for managers to want to arrive at that conclusion too quickly because we're hardwired that way, or because we're feeling pressure that we just need these deals to come in. The coaching gets lost. We just need to, focus on the outcome, and that's it. I think often as well, as a very wise man once said, and I think that person may even be on this call, common sense is not always common practice, right? So again, speaking to many peers in sales management, we could all profess and say, look, we aspire to create a wonderful coaching first culture and capability within the business, but is it actually happening today? No, it's probably not. Was it happening 3 months ago, 6 months ago? No. Are we attempting to get there in the next 3 months? Okay, what are we doing? So I think just having simple, effective, but regular practices is a big element of it. I've worked in actually some quite established businesses that just don't have consistent practices. I think having a why buy team session that you're spending, whatever it is, an hour or an hour and a half, where everyone's eyes and ears are actively listening to the deal that's being presented, whether it's your deal or somebody else's. Everyone in the room has their eyes and ears focused on that and is intently trying to understand what's happening there. Partly because having more brain power on a deal can help us win that deal as a team, right? Or qualify it out or whatever. But also because you create a fantastic forum there to enable, peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer thinking around these things. That can help to accelerate and help to embed learnings around particular tactics to be using. And again, if you're developing a safe coaching environment where people are giving each other really good feedback, where people are opening to listening, taking that on board, asking, constructive and challenging questions of each other and of their deals, that is a great enabler to high performance. So I think simply having that as a regular practice is really, really important.
Yeah, and again, this is about expediting that change in behavior, right? So the regularity is what makes that process go quicker. I've just got a sensor light put in my bathroom at the moment. So when I walk in there, the light turns on automatically. But I keep trying to grasp the light switch because that's what I'm used to doing. I think 2 or 3 days ago was the first time that I actually left the bathroom and was like, I didn't try and turn the light switch off. Now, the great thing about the why by analysis is you only need to do this 2 or 3 times, be it as a group or in a deal review, before the reps walking into those deal reviews next time with those questions in their head. So when they do come to you with a problem, or when they don't have an answer, the specificity of that problem is so clear to both of you that you only end up working on one thing. So when you first roll out something like a why by analysis, everything's all over the place because no one knows those practices and no one knows the answers to those questions. 2 or 3 weeks later, the time that's saved by a rep walking in there going, here's why they're buying anything, here's when they're going to buy it, and ultimately, here's why they're buying it now, and ultimately, here's why they've picked our product. However, I'm struggling to get this over here. It really focuses the conversation and saves a lot of time in the process. Now, again, for you guys listening in, this isn't groundbreaking. You can change this today. You can bring in a why by analysis. But again, when you first start coaching, it's clumsy, it's awkward, and you'll probably shit it, just to be really honest with you, like anything. And I think of it like learning to drive. When you first step into a car, you don't even know where to put your bum, right? But when you practice and you do it enough and you try and seize those coaching opportunities, you get better at it. Ralph, how long did it take you to feel like you were progressing as a coach? And again, I actually sat on the same coaching course as you. And the instructor said, never tell your reps you've been on a coaching course, because the first thing they're going to do is go, all right, you're going to start coaching me. But how long did it take you to feel that you had some degree of control or even expertise around coaching?
Oh, look, great question. You and I were very fortunate because we worked with a brilliant organization back in 2005 in early parts of our sales and sales management career, where we benefited from, a good coaching culture. In my first role as a team leader, I was actually tasked with delivering, I think it was 20 hours of one-to-one coaching across my team of 8 or 9 people at the time, every single week. So it forced me very quickly to understand, okay, how do I do this effectively? How do I become comfortable in my own skin doing this, feeling credible and authentic, and hopefully providing something of value to the person being coached? I think it happened in stages, right? I think the first few weeks and couple of months probably were a little bit awkward. I did a lot of self-reflection on it. I really, I'm someone who naturally likes to help and see others sort of developing. I get a buzz from that. So I think that element of it helped. But I would say in phases, right? That it took me initially a few months to feel comfortable. Then, like with many things, the more you learn about it, the more you realize actually how much more there is still to learn. So probably then another couple of years. But in all honesty, even today, 16 years later, I think there are always things that you can do yourself and that you actually should be doing to keep yourself sharp and self-aware and working on, identifying and improving your own blind spots in order to be a really effective coach. So, I think this is a really nice point, because often we see an environment within sales organizations where you've got top performing reps, often within fast growth organizations as well, top performing reps who are promoted into their first team leadership job, and then asked to coach themselves, right? And they're kind of figuring some of that out as they go. This is what worked for me. How do I impart it onto others? How do I try and do it in a coaching way? But the coach themselves is not being coached, right? So I think one of the things to help one become a successful coach is actually also to ask or request coaching and mentoring yourself. It's really important for you to be able to do that, to stay sharp as well.
I mean, it's a really good point you've raised. And one of the questions that I'm constantly trying to ask myself in any organization I work in is, how do you turn coaching from a moment with a rep to an organizational capability, or till it's sort of deeply entrenched into the DNA of the organization? And for me, what I find is that coaching is one of the few disciplines that can come from the ground up. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the top down. And the example I always use is when you realize that your reps are coaching each other and they've taken on that skill osmotically from you coaching them. And it's such a lovely feeling when you see reps using coaching as their native language with one another, because you feel like it's becoming ingrained in the fabric fibers of the team or the organization. So the reason I raise this point is because there's probably people on this who are sitting there saying, well, we don't have a coaching first culture, or my CEO isn't a coach, or my manager doesn't like coaching. It's absolute nonsense. You can start that revolution today by using something like this, and you're already embedding those behaviors and that inquisitive nature and the way of thinking into your reps by using these processes as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And if I look over the last 15 years working within different businesses, both very, very established corporates and much smaller startup scale ups, different markets, different regions, I think there are times when, I've been part of an organization where there's been a sort of top-down strategic initiative. Right, we want to develop a coaching capability, and then that sort of cascades, and inevitably at some point within that, it starts to get a bit diluted and inconsistent, albeit with the right intent. Other times, and it is a wonderful feeling actually, where there's something bubbling within a pocket of the business, where at a sort of grassroots level, there are ambitious, hungry sales leaders and reps who are wanting to do something different, and they've created this wonderful kind of coaching culture. And within the blink of an eye, you can turn what is a mundane conversation into a wonderful learning opportunity, where someone walks away and that's kind of made their day, and it's given them a real spring in their step. I've seen that happen many, many times, and I'm a big advocate for that grassroots. I also think, though, there comes a point at which if there isn't real alignment across an organization, across those different layers and levels, it's really, really hard to build something sustainable, right? I think every organization, they want to achieve sales excellence. They want to focus on, or they aspire to this, environment of continual improvement. But if you haven't got the right frameworks, the right practices, technologies in place to help enable that, it actually becomes very difficult, right? Because you've got very inconsistent experiences there from an employee experience and engagement point of view. Is it good enough to have one person who's getting coaching from the manager, twice a week, around a particular set of defined competencies and some good benchmarking of those over time, sitting next to someone who's only had a meeting with a manager once a month, right? Yeah. So I think for businesses that are really serious around driving a coaching first culture, and capability, having a defined set of competencies so that managers and individuals know, what to be coached on, knowing when to coach, how to measure the impact of coaching progression. Those things are really, really important. You can get up to a point without some of those, centralized, structures in place. But they absolutely are there to help, sort of codify and scale it all, I would say.
That's sort of coaching 2.0, right? Is where you've actually operationalized your coaching across the business, and now it's like a muscle within that business as well. Let's talk a little bit about accountability, right? So let's bring it back to the why by analysis. Yeah. So you've got the rep to look at the problem from every single angle. You've identified what those problems are. And now we want to talk about the accountability of actually laying that plan out, right? Now, in my experience, you're thinking about helping them build a strategy to now go and execute. And like I said before, you don't necessarily have the answers, and it's not your responsibility to tell them those answers. But some good things to think about when someone's identified they've got a problem with an opportunity and they're now going to embark on a strategy to improve it, are questions like this. What are you actually going to do? What are the steps that you are going to take? Now, this next question is really interesting, because if you're doing coaching really, really well, you're not just getting them to think about the problem and the solution to the problem. You're getting them to think about the peripheral issues that might sit around that problem as well. So a really good thing to think about is, how do I actually have a plan B for this as well? So we can actually execute something, and if it doesn't go right, what else can I do? So get them to think about what could go wrong with the strategy that they're about to embark on. And when are you going to go and do it? Almost every single coaching session I have that's formalized, I ask that question: when are you going to go and do it? If you could leave here now and do one thing, what would you do? And what's stopping you doing that now? And on that mindset of actually, creating a plan B, much like a client, I'm sure that a lot of you guys in the room now do this with clients. I say to the rep, what could stop you doing it in that timeline? So all of a sudden, you've got a diagnosis of the problem. Yeah, they've come up with that diagnosis themselves. They've got a strategy that they're now going to actually put into play. They've thought about the potential problems that strategy could cause, and they've committed to a timeline of when they're going to do it. That's the great white buffalo, right? You've got someone to come up with that all themselves, and now they're going to go and do it. But let's talk about accountability with that, right? Who's accountable for the action points after coaching?
I think it's a shared accountability, right? Your role as the coach is to help define a clear goal and help that person get to that goal, right? But likewise, the coachee needs to take full accountability on their side of it, right? In terms of actually going and executing on that and working towards that same goal. So this is where I think, having a really strong coaching relationship can be so powerful in terms of facilitating many other things, not just becoming more effective in your current role, but actually developing your career, right? So I think the accountability part is a really, really important one. And I love, these conversations can be had within a matter of minutes, or they could be more formalized or less so. But just by simply asking a set of questions that allows someone to, within their own mind, actually crystallize what they're going to be doing, and as a result of that, take on that accountability for actually going and doing that. The wonderful thing that often happens is at the end of that conversation, they feel kind of quite uplifted. You can visibly see it. They say, "Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really helpful." And the great answer is, "Well, actually, I didn't tell you anything there. You actually came up with all of those answers yourself." And they turn around and go, "Oh yeah, I guess I did." And it's that moment when they have that sort of internal flick of a switch that they go, "You know what? Actually, I did come up with those answers. I came with a solution. I came with a problem that I didn't even know exactly what the nature of that problem was. And I've now walked away and found my own solution to that, albeit I've been guided there, in an intelligent way." But it's that switch that gets flicked by having that type of conversation that is so positively pervasive for that individual in other things that they then go on to do, right? If they've had that type of interaction a number of times, you can see that there's a sort of a change in their behavior. They start to take more initiative. They start to actually have those types of conversations with peers. I think this is the really important aspect, of it, right? Is this is just simply one environment in which you can have a coaching conversation, but the outcome from that it encourages in that person, they can apply that in many different contexts then.
Absolutely. And I'm feeling energetic just listening to you say that, because I know that feeling of like when someone's like, they're buoyed by the fact that they've done this themselves. And that little peek behind the kimono of like, well, I didn't do anything. This was you, right? Is a really good feeling. We've got a few questions coming through.
Confidence. It breeds confidence and belief and a sense of purpose, what they're doing.
I've been on the other side of the table as well, where I've been coached and I'm like, you know what? I can do this. Yeah, it's a great feeling. We've got another slide we want to go through because it kind of resolves the melody of what we've been talking about. But then we'll answer the questions that have come through. And there's some really good questions, by the way, guys. But look, I spoke about this a little bit before. This for me is kind of a combination of all of it, is what we actually do next, what the next steps are. Spending 25 minutes coaching someone, them going away and doing something and then not having any touch point after that is basically a waste of time, and also a clear way of losing credibility with the rep, right? So what we need to do is set action points in place, and this drives the agenda for the next coaching conversation that we have. Could be around pipeline, it could be outside of pipeline and at this coaching, but again, it's driving that agenda. So first of all, we agree on what that rep's going to do. We talk about how we're going to do that, which is the strategy. And then we put an outcome in there and we document it. So this is what you are going to do. And we're going to catch up on Tuesday at 2 p.m. to talk about how that went. So this is now diarized after a point where they've said they're going to do it. So you can actually share the learnings and use that as a coaching conversation with that rep to talk about what went well and what didn't go well as well. Now that in itself is so powerful, because what you end up doing is you end up always having an agenda for your coaching. And it's always about, this is what I tried, it didn't go right, what else can I try? Well, what do you think you can try next? And that is incredibly powerful. The danger here is breaking that cycle. Go for the coaching, really good outcomes. We don't speak to each other for 3 weeks. And when I do, I tell you what you got to do. That is really, really damaging to the relationship of the coach and the coachee, but also for the culture of coaching as well.
Yeah, really important point. And I would say again, like with many things, it's about doing something with the right intent, little and often. If you tried to coach and then it starts to fizzle out after a few weeks or a couple of months, like many things do, it's the small steps that you take to follow up to maintain that practice, which is actually what helps to really enable it.
Absolutely. Well, look, just to sum up what we've spoken about today, obviously we've spoken about the importance of a coaching culture and the fact that you can now affect a coaching culture. Give yourself the time and the space to fail and get it right eventually, and use it in pipeline reviews. Start with that why by analysis. Those broad questions are a really good way of creating a funnel to question down to make sure that you're finding out what that diagnosis for that problem is. Talk about the strategy, get the rep to come up with the strategy themselves, and make sure that there's follow through, and you catch up with the rep to make sure that they've done something and to see how that went as well. Now, we've had some really interesting questions come through. Raf, I'm just going to read these out, and I don't know whether you want to take a stab, and I'll take a stab at them as well. But to start with, anonymous attendee, I assume that's not their real name. Where do you feel and to what extent does mentoring play a part in coaching systems and the coaching journey? I'll let you tackle this, Raf, because I know you're passionate about this.
Yeah, fantastic question. It's an interesting one because coaching and mentoring sometimes get conflated as well, right? So we're looking at mentoring as a more broader guide to someone around goals that they may have within their current or future roles. You may not be focused on helping them increase their performance as such, or focus on a very specific performance related goal, but you're actually helping them achieve growth in an area that they are focusing on, right? So I think within the context of a typical sales environment, there are times when you may be having what are coaching-led conversations where you might apply some mentorship as well, right? Because you might be providing some advice, you might be there to provide a kind of sounding board where relevant, right? Because there are going to be times when someone actually doesn't know the answer, where you've tried to use a coaching approach to help them arrive at an answer. You've helped to provide some additional context from your experience, and it's still not achieving the desired outcome. So there's nothing wrong at all with providing some more mentorship type approach and providing advice to help them get there, right? So I think it's important to understand the role that mentorship plays and how that differentiates from coaching, but also recognize that these aren't completely delineated methods, right? They all have different elements that are there to help someone fundamentally develop. So coaching and mentoring often sit hand in hand within a particular environment because you're needing to facilitate the learning through both those approaches.
Great stuff. I've got a question here.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I mean, do you have any other perspective on that, Aaron?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, look, I think that they definitely bleed into one another, right? This is the point. And I guess let's talk a bit about this. When you're mentoring, I'm guessing that you're leaning on someone's expertise and experience to guide you along the way. So I do feel sometimes there is a time and a place for someone to turn around and go, well, look, anecdotally, let me give you my experience on this as well, which isn't coaching. That is what I'd consider to be the conventional mentoring, which is I've walked the walk already. Let me share my experience. I mean, the dream is to have a blend of the both, right? Someone who can both coach and mentor, so you can see practical examples, learn from their lessons, but at the same time, they're offering you coaching along the way. Yeah. There's a really interesting question here, again, from anonymous attendee. Using why buy and asking why buy anything, I often get an answer of because they don't have insight into what their product offers. Now, again, that's outcome-based. What we really want to get to is why. So the question I'd be inclined to ask there is, why do they need that? Why is that so important to them? What does that help them solve? Now, a gentleman I used to work with called Mark Bishop always had this wonderful question that he'd always ask anyone who came to his desk is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Because the outcome can be achieved a multitude of different ways, or it might not be able to be achieved at all. What we need to look at in the why buy analysis is, what is it that they're trying to solve? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And it's not a why question, but ultimately it's going to get you what you want, which is the reason, the motivation, the inclination to buying anything at all. It's important to separate outcome and reason to buy something. People might want the outcome, but let's learn about why that's so important, because that gives you so much more, quantifies the problem, helps you understand the intricacies of the problem, other problems that are around it. And that's really, really important.
Yeah. And again, I think having that additional context, right, allows you to apply that thinking into other potential opportunities, either to respond to those or actually to preempt. So your whole behavior or the approach that you might take with a new opportunity will be informed to an extent by the increased level of context you've had around something previously. So again, brilliant coaching opportunity.
There's a great question here, and I think it goes to your point before, Raf, is on the huddles or group meetings, do you take a more of a coaching style or a directive style?
It depends. It depends. But I would say, I like to encourage a an environment, or I suppose you could almost say even a set of values within a team, right? So when I've been in a sales management leadership role, right, where actually the development, everyone buys into an aspiration that we want to continually improve, right? It's this whole concept of marginal gains. If we can identify 10, 20, 30, whatever areas within our sort of sales performance that we can continue optimizing, then we're getting stronger and stronger every day, even if it's by 1%, right? We're constantly improving, and we have the courage to have conversations to say, okay, what can we be doing better around this, right? In order to do that, actually, I believe that there's a shared accountability. It isn't just for the sales manager or coach to do that, right? Everyone needs to take accountability for their own development, but also, and I've seen this when it's been done well, in actually each other's as well, right? So there might be times when you're running a group huddle as the leader where you may want to take on a role of a facilitator, where you're encouraging others to say, okay, well, look, this is a really interesting problem here that Susan has raised. John, what do you think about this? Think about the last deal that you worked on. What learnings did you take from that? And what advice would you give to Susan around this opportunity? So again, you could facilitate that conversation with peer-to-peer coaching in a group environment. I've seen that done really, really well. There might be other times when you might want to be, more directive and say, actually, look, this is what we need to achieve. Here are some of the outcomes. It really depends on the context. I think as a broad underlying theme, though, you always look for an opportunity to coach and not tell. That's the kind of overriding theme that we're getting across here within the session. Is coaching is around asking great questions and provoking great questions in others, because it helps them take on new ways of thinking, new behaviors, and arriving at their own conclusions, which is a much more effective long-term strategy for high performance, as opposed to just standing there and directing or telling the answers all the time. Now, there is a time and place for that, but just think about how you can bring a coaching approach into your interactions.
Well, Raf, it's been really interesting listening to your perspective on these things. Although I feel like I know them inside out, I always learn something new when I talk to you about this sort of stuff. If people want to get hold of you or learn more about flow state, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, Raphael at flowstate.co.uk. Very welcome to email me, message me on LinkedIn, check out our website, contact us through there. Very happy to have conversations off the back of this. Always really enjoy engaging in conversations around sales practices and enjoy helping. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, obviously, guys, you can find me on LinkedIn or my YouTube channel, Aaron Evans Sales Training. Feel free to subscribe to that as well. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors as well, Wiser Elite and obviously E4 Enable. Sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all of your questions. It was really nice having you guys jump in and learn. If you've got any other questions or you want some of the questions that we didn't get time to answer, feel free to get in touch with either of us over LinkedIn or whatnot. And yeah, really enjoyed having you in our webinar. So thank you so much.